It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them. Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness.
The past. It's a funny thing. Always behind you, but willing to rear its head in your mind. Be it an embarrassment from an event that happened years ago, a first kiss from a sweetheart, or even a night out with friends. Those memories shape who you are, and they always follow no matter what. The dark side is no different for the Jedi Order, always in its shadow and creeping to devour it. Once more, it would try to take the Order, as another schism arose in the next phase of the Wars of Light and Dark. The year is 7003 BBY, and the Jedi Order has stood against the various crises that have ravaged the galaxy. But over the last 17,500 years, a state of true peace has been short-lived. From the Chinese War, that ignited the Republic's appetite for battle, to the Alsalkan conflicts, to the Star Dragon contention. Look, I'm not gonna actually say this name, okay? This is just nuts. And the dread Pius Dia Crusades, which for 1,000 years held a stranglehold on the galaxy. A new conflict was brewing, this time within the Jedi Order itself. For millennia, the Jedi have acted as protectors and watchmen for the nascent Republic. Their autonomy allowed them to withdraw and even oppose their charge when the worst instincts came to the surface. But with conflicts ended, or as later history would show, merely paused, an old specter would spread its hand through the Jedi Order once more. The Second Great Schism started almost like the first, the only difference being that this was something rooted in the Jedi. They were mentioned briefly in the previous entry, but are important here. Among their skills was Force alchemy, akin but different to Sith alchemy. It held a balanced practice, focusing on understanding the Force and the connection to all things, including the physical world.
For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the Force around you. Here, between you, me, the tree, the rock, everywhere. Yes, even between the land and the ship.
With it, a Jedi could create Force swords, enhancing the metal to imbue it with the Force. Not unlike the Force weapon ability, which channels Force energy into a weapon, allowing the wielder to strike with more damage and even capable of blocking lightsabers. But unlike Force weapon, this was more permanent. It fundamentally altered the blade by the use of crystals that acted as a focus, similar to the basis of a lightsaber. But there were other, darker applications, like alchemy of the flesh, which altered living beings, twisting them into monstrosities. For example, the mighty Jedi killer, the Torrent attack. Many assumed it was a Sith creation, but its origins are far more disturbing, as there was a precursor species created, a Jedi Master, Bon Jang, during the Tythonian Despot War. It eventually developed a taste for Force-enriched meat, a frightening parallel reinforcing the saying that nothing original exists under the stars. It was the rediscovery of Force alchemy that sparked the Second Great Schism, as a group of Jedi began practicing extended uses of the dark side. They discovered that life itself could be bent if the Force was used at sufficient intensity. They drew the attention of the many Jedi, not just impressionable Padawans or inexperienced knights, but even Jedi Masters. Among them was Ajunta Pall. Some will say that this was done in secret, that the Jedi would never allow the dark side to be used so openly, but that is not the Jedi way. Even as these falling Jedi experimented on other life forms, creating monsters as extensions of their own will, other Jedi looked upon them with horror. The horror! Imagine seeing a puppy transformed into a grotesque monster that towers above a human, with wicked fangs and claws, skin mutated and molted, covered in welts, hunting down Force users to devour them. Or a lizard, a gecko, made into a creature so tall that it makes skyscrapers look small, with blister traps on its back and tendrils that steal the life force of others. These are the creatures the fallen Jedi created. Yet some would say the Jedi were evil for banning this perversion of life, the truest face of what the dark side is. Not some flashy lightning jumping off of one's fingertips, but instead pure corruption of life itself. Paul and others who joined him attempted to appeal to their fellows to embrace the dark side rather than to fear it, but they were unconvinced. Soon arguments gave way to bloodshed. Ajunta Pall and his followers became angered by what they deemed Jedi arrogance when the High Council forbade the use of these abilities. They believed there was nothing but fear driving the council, a common misconception. But it was not fear. It was disgust, shame, heartbreak at seeing such prominent, powerful members of the Order being driven down this path willingly. Every debate, every argument, every attempt to turn them away from this only led the group to become more entrenched in their ideals. They stood adamant in protecting their newly acquired powers, and there was only one possible outcome. Just as Xander and his students left the Jedi Order to create their own school, only to return and force their ideals on their former compatriots, this group would not allow itself to be ignored. Yet, when conflict became inevitable, the Jedi did what those who levy fear at their feet should never do if they were truly afraid. They exiled them. The Jedi didn't kill the exiles, they didn't lock them away, or push their ideals on them. They gave the group time to think, to reflect. Yet it was all for naught. The Jedi had made a mistake. They put too much faith in the exiles to come to the conclusion that should have been obvious, that what they've done to life was wrong. That was the truest sense of abomination, a word used far too liberally to render it meaningless, but here it was justified. Yet the Jedi did not do what they needed to in order to end the exiles, and instead they forged the Order's stance.
Beware of the dark side. Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are they. Easily they flow, quick to join you in a fight. If once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you it will, as it did Obi-Wan's apprentice.
What began on that day became a war unlike any that had been seen since Xander and Ardent Lyn marched the legions of fallen Jedi to strike at the Order. It would dwarf all conflicts the Republic had fought over the last 17,000 years. For the war between the Jedi and the Exiles would spawn the deepest nightmares of the galaxy, only exceeded by the new Sith Wars 6,000 years later, and the Yuuzhan Vong War after that. It would engulf everything for the next 100 years. The exiles moved swiftly to gather themselves and organize into different structures within their new reality they found themselves in. Within a very short amount of time, they would settle on their roles, with Ajunta Pall being first amongst them, stronger than the rest and having been the foremost advocate for the use of their powers. Such a role as leader was natural for him. Then there was Zaxxon, who stood as the Martianist of the Black Legions, an elite military unit of Dark Jedi that acted as the sledgehammer to the battlefield's anvil. Then there was Romulus Draper, commander of their space forces, formerly given the title Admiral. Next was Carnus Mur, once a renowned and promising Jedi Knight who had incredible power in both lightsaber combat and use of the Force, acting as a frontline commander that held the army together, the closest thing they had to a general. And finally, of those known, there was a former Jedi who committed herself to the dark side more than any other. Sorzus Syn, she who created the dark side alchemy and made it into her very reason for being, and as a result became a master summoner. It would be through her powers that the smaller Dark Jedi army would gain the leverage they needed to fight this campaign. She wove together bone and sinew to fashion monsters, obedient beasts that would fill the battlefield. Shamblers, howlers, pit horrors, creatures born from the nightmares, taken physical shape by a twisted imagination. With that, the Dark Jedi struck at the Jedi Order, but the Jedi had learned from the First Great Schism and Xander's blunders. Unlike back then, the Dark Jedi were too few in numbers to strike at Ossus. Their powers, despite what they saw, had alienated too many of their former comrades. And even if they hadn't, the Jedi Order had grown stronger since those days. They had fortified their minds and beliefs. The Army of Light that annihilated the legions of the Thau became a solid wall that could bleed members yet still remain standing and unassailable. It did not matter how many abominations Syn had woven into being. The outcome would remain the same. The Dark Jedi would lose, and their cause would be lost forever. Yet there still remained a dark hope. scope. The Jedi Order was not concentrated on Ossus. It served as the homeworld and their greatest bastion over the last few millennia. This is true, but across the Republic, the Jedi had created satellite temples, smaller, less heavily defended worlds that were vulnerable with local populations. These populations could be drawn in, used to keep the Jedi off balance, to put their code at risk in exchange for their lives, to put selfishness before selflessness, and to be used as fuel for the Dark Jedi's war machine, as the very populations could be twisted into these monstrosities to keep the war going. And that's how they would conduct the war, sending pain and suffering through the Force to distract the Jedi before the ground forces engaged, giving the exiles a chance to defeat and offer their brethren a chance to see the light and to kill them when they rejected. Innocents were butchered by ravening monsters that surged from cargo holds, while Syn wove new creatures into life that turned friends and family against one another. It was a scene from hell. At first, these assaults were met with resounding results, leaving the Jedi seemingly paralyzed on what to do and how to counter this new threat that they never wished to fight. Some still clung to the hope that the exiles would see the error of their ways, but that was only a fallacy. Others wanted to take the fight to them, giving into the dark side without even realizing it. The desire to do good, to protect, would give way to harsher emotions, darker thoughts of taking revenge upon those who had inflicted such death and destruction. If it hadn't been for the council reining them in, the Dark Jedi Exiles could have won. Even if they couldn't defeat the Jedi militarily, they could have tainted them. That threat was far too high, and so the Jedi constructed the Prism, a secret prison facility known only to the members of the Jedi High Council, also known as the Ghost Prison. It was placed in wild space, designed to be inescapable and self-sustaining, to house incredibly dangerous criminals without killing them. This ensured that the Jedi would not become monsters themselves. With the prison now operational, the Jedi met their fallen brethren on the battlefield in full force, and the 100-year darkness began in earnest. When the Jedi struck back, reinforcing their temples and returning to a republic damaged by the exiles' action, it was as if the light side itself had declared their time of horror had come to an end. The will of the Force guided them, an ethereal hand providing insight to counter this threat. For years, the two clashed across the republic, the fights the legends are made of. Monsters surged in their thousands, defying blaster fire and swords, with their dark masters following behind before the Jedi arrived. Thin lines of light bolstered beleaguered republic troops, with proto blades flashing to cleave through horrific torturous things and meant against other blades. One such battle took place on Balmora, where Jedi had erected the barricades and manned them. They fought for days against the Dark Jedi Exiles, standing as a bastion. But on that world, as the Dark Jedi Alliance faltered, a new creature emerged, the truest sense of the dark side's all-consuming nature, the Leviathan. Born from the twisted mind of Sen, the Leviathan was a true work of art in her eyes, living super weapons that drew the life energies of enemy soldiers into blister traps that dotted their wide backs. Their presence interfered with the sensory abilities of Force sensitives, causing victims to hear screams, develop headaches, and trigger obsessive behavior centered on stopping the scream. It drove them into madness. For those who could not touch the Force, the gigantic size made it all the more apparent that it dwarfed them utterly, maybe 30 or even 100 times taller. It didn't matter. For many, the last thing they would see was either a tendril that sapped their life force away, leaving a dead body in its wake, or being devoured whole by razor-sharp teeth. The Leviathans roared through the battlefield, devastating and seemingly unstoppable, with Crespukle the ever-hungry, the personal favorite of its insane creator, leading the way. Such creatures had made open battlefield combat contentious at best, leaving the Republic wondering why their Jedi protectors couldn't win swiftly. Each day the Dark Jedi rampaged across the Republic, more faith was lost in the Jedi Order. Yet the Jedi and the Republic had only each other. For each day the Dark Jedi showed their depravity and selfishness, the Jedi's fates intertwined with the Republic's ever more tightly. They would stand and live, or fall and die. They would be together regardless of the outcome. The first time, both faced extinction. One such operation to end the war swiftly took place on the planet Fluwhaka in the Outer Rim, with rocky spires and crags that make it difficult for massive creatures like the Leviathans to move freely. There, the Jedi Republic forces had set an ambush with the Dark Jedi army. After drawing them in, the army arrived, led by Carnus Moore, the leading general of the Dark Jedi, and effectively the third most important ground commander. Once in the trap, the Jedi and the Republic struck from hidden positions, seeking to destroy this segment of the Exiles' army and capture Mur. But they had underestimated may emerge talented with the Force. Despite being outmaneuvered and severely disadvantaged by the terrain, the exiles used the Force to turn the disadvantages around. What was meant to be a trap became a bloody battle that allowed the exiles' army to escape. Yet this would be the beginning of the end of the Dark Jedi. Their numbers were dwindling and they were overstretched. They could not contend with both the Jedi and the Republic indefinitely. A century of combat had reduced them. Driven from the core worlds and scattered across the Outer Rim on multiple fronts, the exiles were reaching their breaking point. They needed a final decisive victory, and so gathered their remaining forces at Corbos, preparing the Jedi and the Republic to pursue them. But the Dark Jedi didn't have to wait long. As the combined strike forces of the Jedi and the Republic stormed the system, Republic warships clashed with the Exiles' fleet as they approached the planet, raining hellfire and flak into the vacuum, followed by the silent death screams of those caught in space combat. Like an awakened Krayt dragon, the Republic Navy charged full speed ahead, breaking openings within the enemy formations. Drop ships poured from hangars towards the planet's surface, escorted by swarms of starfighters. And once on the ground, Jedi strike teams poured onto the battlefield, proto sabers flashing in blurred motions as they struck the forward lines of the exiles. Republic troop transports followed shortly thereafter, accompanied by planetary defense forces from various Republic worlds, ragtag yet determined, seeking payback for a century of terror. Ironically enough, these brave men and women would become the first Jedi hunters, a tradition that would continue throughout the Star Wars galaxy into the far future. Despite being outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched, the Dark Jedi fought like mythic gods of battle. Anger and determination drove them, while Leviathans rampaged across the field, their roars echoing like haunting screams, electrifying the dark side itself. The clash mirrored the primordial conflict between light and dark from the beginning of every myth across the galaxy, and Corbos itself was forever scarred. Ajunta Pall, fueled by the dark side's power, had become a juggernaut, personally slaying more than a dozen Jedi in the conflagration. Even as battle raged below, the fury of the Republic Navy utterly shattered the Exiles' fleet, allowing reinforcements to reach the surface. Jedi worked together, concentrating on the Force, manipulating the very elements themselves to strike down the Leviathans, freeing trapped souls from the blister traps. And as the monstrous creatures fell, only a handful remained, hiding beneath Corbos to slumber. They were the last remnants of the Exiles' army, and by the end of the battle, only 12 Dark Jedi remained, and the war was over. After the Battle of Corbos, the Jedi Order and the Republic faced a crossroads. Following a century of terror and unimaginable war crimes, the Senate demanded the execution of the Dark Jedi, as one does. Yet the Jedi Council advocated for them, arguing that despite their horrific crimes, their fallen brethren could still be redeemed. The exiles, after all, once had everything. Now there was nothing. They were stripped of armies, influence, and refuge, hated beyond all measure. They had nowhere to go. The Jedi requested for them to live, but to be confined for all eternity. One can only imagine the amount of screaming, arguments, and proclamations of treason that were being made during that time, until finally the Republic begrudgingly accepted. With one condition: the exiles would not be imprisoned, but instead exiled from known space that they had ravaged, never to return even if redeemed, on pain of death. The Jedi had no choice but to agree, and so the exiles were stripped of their weapons, their armor, and the navigational instruments of their ships to prevent them from ever returning to Republic or even finding rest, but instead float in the void of space for all eternity. This was, ironically enough, precisely the outcome desired by one of them. Sorzus Syn of her cunning. She had done more during the war than create monsters and hone her alchemical skills. She had been collecting knowledge, rumors, and intelligence. See, there's a reason why they chose Corbos to be the location of their final battle. It's because of a certain nebula, the Stygian caldera, which acted as a hyperfacial breakwater and made navigation difficult. But amongst many rumors that she had collected was that within that very nebula was an empire, one steeped in the dark side unlike anything ever seen. Well, to be entirely honest, it was little more than a spacer's tale, a fantasy really. But Syn believed them to be true. And so, when they were shot into space, she guided her fellow exiles through the Stygian caldera, and eventually they would arrive on Korriban, where the red-skinned Sith had returned after the death of a Sith king 50 years earlier, around 6950 BBY. There, the Dark Jedi impressed the Sith with their power over the dark side, and were named the Jedi, which just basically means Dark Jedi in the Sith language. After a time, they overthrew the current Sith king, Hargrim Rush, and with his death, the newly named Jedi appointed themselves Lords of the Sith. Ajunta Pall was granted the title Jin-Ari, better known as Dark Lord of the Sith, and thus began the Sith Order and the establishment of the original Sith Empire, thus setting the stage for the Sith to become the key representatives of the dark side in the galaxy and the Jedi's unending enemy.